Like so many folks here from Louisiana, my parents moved here to the Biloxi coast from Louisiana in the early 20th century, seeking a better life. Hi, my name is Raymond Edgars. Some of you may remember me as Red. I was born in Louisiana January 25th, 1909, and was only 3 years old when we moved here. We lived originally out on the East Howard Avenue out in the Point in a neighborhood with many other families from Louisiana, some from as far away as Yugoslavia. My father, Henry Edgars, died in 1921 after a long and lingering illness. Dad's funeral was at St. Michael's Church of the Fishermen. And his passing left my mother, Zoe Steinfeld Edgars, in a severe financial situation. Mom went to work as a cook and a housekeeper, frequently advertising in the Daily Herald for jobs. She was a hard worker and a good provider, took good care of my older siblings, my brother Henry, my sister Zoe, and me. I was the youngest. Due to those tight circumstances, I only went to school through 3rd grade. All of us had to pitch in and help support the family, and I was 7 years old when I got my job at Marver's Seafood Company. Seems difficult to think about today, but that's just the way things were handled in 1916. Mom eventually remarried in 1927, and she and my stepfather, Mr. Joseph Balius, were together for several years until Mom passed away at age 54 in 1939. Now, among my other careers, I worked for a while at Klein's Bakery out on Lemieux Street, and I was a salesman at the Albert Pickett Tobacco Company. My first year there, I made $832. Now, for a man with a 3rd grade education in the middle of the Depression in the 1930s, that was a fair sum of money. And it was about this time that I met and fell in love with Johanna Lily Esposito. We were married in 1935 at the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Cathedral. Had a short but wonderful honeymoon over in New Orleans, and I still remember how lovely she looked as we drove home on the fairly new Highway 90 as the brand new Mr. and Mrs. Raymond Edgars. Eventually I went to work for the Biloxi Water and Sewer Company, also served as a volunteer fireman, and for a while I had my own candy company, made and sold candy to some of the mom and pop grocery stores in East Biloxi. Now, I enjoyed all of my careers, as varied as they were, but my heart and soul and my real love was always music. I played snare drum from the time I was a little boy, and by age 13, I had organized my first jazz band. We called ourselves the Biloxi Spasms. The band was made up entirely of teenagers from the local Biloxi area, and we played all over town. We got gigs at weddings and parties, at dances. We played in the Fireman's Day Parade. We played at the VFW, out at Keesler, and several other clubs in the area. And for a few years as a teenager in a band, that was a good life. By age 19, the band had evolved some, and we were playing for the Monday night Glad You Come dances at the Pavilion out at Walkenfeld's Pier. Now, the Pavilion was a popular venue because of the various, because of its location next to the Biloxi Yacht Club. and the availability of water activities during the day, and folks could stay and linger into the evening for the music and the dances. The pier was lighted up at night with colored lights strung from end to end. By 1942, we were firmly known as the Red Edgars Jazz Band, and at that time I worked with some of the finest musicians from the Biloxi area. Name just a couple of them. Mr. Johnny Bertucci, Mr. Lawrence Simsky, Mr. Earl Blessey, a distinguished trombonist and band leader in his own right. Also played with Marion Professor Carpenter. Most of y'all, some of y'all may remember him as your music teacher. He was a band leader, a musician. He taught music in the school system, and he was an outstanding man to play with. We also had Clarence Ken Harter, and I mentioned Earl Blessey, I think. All of these were outstanding musicians, and one of the great joys of being a jazz musician is the way that other musicians will voluntarily show up and sit in with you. And on many occasions, Mr. Merritt Brunies, one of jazz music's finest musicians, would occasionally sit in and play with us. Merritt and his brother Abby, and they had three other brothers, all musicians, all with distinguished careers, grew up in the Irish Channel neighborhood of New Orleans, and they were regarded as jazz legends here on the coast. They're regarded as the grandfathers of jazz here along the Mississippi coast. Merritt was an outstanding musician, and I considered it an honor to play with him, and still to this day regard him as a jazz legend. Now, making music is a rewarding and fulfilling career in its own right, and making people happy is the best part of being with your music, is the best part of being a musician. And I was blessed with that opportunity for 50 wonderful years. Passed away in 1983 at the age of 74. Now, as you folks continue your journey, I want you to enjoy learning more about jazz, not just in New Orleans, but here on the Mississippi coast, from a legend who helped create it, Mr. Jelly Roll Morton.
Well, it's been a long time since I sat at a piano beating out jazz chords. I play piano, drums, and guitar, but I'm most famous for the piano with over 100 records, even the old wax platters. Now, you might wonder what I'm doing here in Biloxi. I was born in New Orleans. My actual birthplace and date are unknown. My birth date could be October 20th or September 20th, 1890, or even earlier. My father, Edward Lamont, was a bricklayer, and my mother, Louise Monet, was a cook and housekeeper. When I was 6, they arranged guitar lessons, but I swung between the piano and drums also. I was a good musician, and at age 14, I played in a Storyville establishment for the customers. Storyville was a part of New Orleans with small houses with women boarders, where the men came to be entertained, if you know what I mean. Man, I sang some smutty lyrics there, and to protect my family, I changed my name to Jelly Roll. So from that moment forward, Ferdinand Joseph Lamont became Jelly Roll Morton from a musical career. With some money in my pocket and talent and music, I left New Orleans. I did return home often, but I traveled the country playing nightclubs from New York to California, and even here in Biloxi. Biloxi was a hopping place for musical venues at that time, just down on Main Street, just east of here. And my godmother, Laura Hunter, lived just north of here, just across the tracks. And I was in this little bitty city from 1907 until 1908. You ever been down Main Street just north of the tracks? That stretch between there and Division Street was hopping for musical venues. And I tell you, it was a time. You can listen to music, gamble, eat, and have fun at the Little Apple, the Big Apple, Club Desire, the Shalimar, and the Blue Note. Now, I played over at the Flat Top owned by Arthur Glover. It's on Raynor Street, just north of the tracks, in what used to be the Biloxi Light Company building. The turpentine distillery workers would come down from north of the bay Sometimes gave away a week's pay overnight and then head back over the bridge when the sun came up. While I was in town, I courted Betsy Johnson, who went by the stage name Renita Gonzalez. She had 3 brothers who were also musicians, so we had a great time together. Biloxi was prosperous at this time, and I stayed around to entertain the tourists. Folks would come from New York and Chicago to enjoy everything we had to offer. The seafood industry was also booming, and I guess my reputation was sound because I played some soirees for W.K.M. Ducate, who with his partner started the first Biloxi seafood factory in 1881. I even heard Biloxi was called the seafood capital of the world at that time. Biloxi was good to me, but I wanted to broaden my musical horizons, so I left and did well for a long time, until my luck ran out in the late 1930s. In 1938, I was stabbed, and 3 years later, in 1941, I passed away in a Los Angeles hospital. But when I was alive, I was the king of jazz, the originator of jazz, the king of ragtime, and can now be found in several halls of fame around the world. Now, Biloxi's musical scene in that area stayed hot until the late 1980s. I bet some of you were there to see that. And if you were, I hope you said, "I'll dance off my shoes when they play those Jelly Roll Blues."
Hey y'all, it's great to see every one of you. I'm Emil Desport, the 4th in my family to carry this name, and proudly I carried it for all my 59 years. I carried it, but no one ever called me by it. Well, except maybe the Sisters of Mercy, especially Sister Adrian down at Holy Angels on the Point. To everyone else, I was just Junie. That's it, and that's who I'll always be. Sort of like Elvis. You know, we both only needed one name. Now, Elvis was the king of rock and roll, but me, I was the king of Holy Angels. And that's where it all started, folks. My son, Emil Desport, well, everyone called him Little Junie. And my father, Emil Desport, everyone called him Junior. We were members of a long-time Biloxi seafood family. I'm standing here today at the grave of my great-great-grandfather, Clodomir Desport. Clodomir, boy, I bet he prayed for a nickname. He was born in 1829 and passed away in 1886, and just behind him is the grave of Louis-Jacques Desport of Normandy, France, born in 1791 and passed away here in Biloxi in 1879. Yes, 7 generations of Desports are buried right here in Biloxi, and what a place to call home. This Biloxi with roots deeper than the Gulf of Mexico itself. If I could have lived 1,000 lifetimes, they'd all be right here in Biloxi. I grew up in the 50s, a great time to be a kid. I rode my bike everywhere and had friends in every Biloxi neighborhood and across the bay. I was in a Catholic family. Even old Louis-Jacques was Catholic. Mom and Dad sent me to St. John Catholic Elementary on Lemieux Street. And after that, I went to Biloxi Public Schools. I graduated from Biloxi High in 1965, where of course I was voted most handsome. Hey, what can I say, y'all? It happened. Being a Biloxi teenager in the 60s was the best. Living close to the water, we spent our time fishing and skiing, enjoying the islands, you know, living the good life. Now, I wasn't just handsome. I excelled at sports and won many trophies as a competitive bowler. Golf, though, would become my lifelong sport of choice. And if you want to know how good I was, just ask Harold Briel, Keith Pizarich, James Carraway, Mark Mumbley, Jim Howard, Phil Dellinger, Art Cantrell, or Pete Hillette. Well, on second thought, maybe don't ask them. But duty always called. Growing up, I worked my way through every single job at Desport & Sons Seafood. It wasn't work for me. I loved it, even the hard parts. It was my family tradition, ran through my veins, and became my heartbeat. As I matured, I took on more responsibility in the business, and if you'll allow me, I was a damn good businessman, a tycoon even. I had a real rapport with the customers. I mean, who do you think came up with the family discount? I had some great instincts and some good mentoring by my dad. During my time at the helm, the business flourished and grew. I became an expert in the industry. But look, let's don't talk about business, let's talk fun. Back to the 60s. I was a band student at Biloxi High, and what great luck it was to be in the Biloxi High band under the instruction of Marion Carpenter, prof to all of his students. He was more than a musician, he was more than a teacher. What he taught can't be learned in books. He had a real respect for the impact he could have on his students' lives. He wasn't preachy, he just lived it, you know? It's a lesson I took to heart and served me well. As if being in the high school band wasn't enough, I started my own band, Junie and the Chantels. The Chantels were Bobby Melancon, Glenn Foray, Fofo Gillich, Rodney Payne, and James Darnell. Our musical influences were Jerry Lee Lewis, the Beach Boys, Sinatra, Motown. Look, if it sounds like we were all over the place, we were. We played something for anybody who'd listen. Say, what do y'all think about this nice jacket? Now look, don't laugh. This was the style we wore to our gigs. We played local area homecomings, Perk, USM, Old Miss, but we really hit the big time when we played the Peppermint Lounge, the Buena Vista Lounge, and Gus Stevens. There was a time when I ate, drank, and slept music. It's truly the language we all share. I mean, you might not have a thing in common with someone, and then you find out you both love Satchmo. My favorite song to perform was Great Balls of Fire. You know, you shake my nerves and you rattle my brains. And we really cut it up on Double Shot of My Baby's Love. At the risk of repeating myself, those were the good old days. I'm married twice. Thank you, Angie, for 30 wonderful years. And I had 3 beautiful children I love more than life itself. Little Junie, Angel, and Sean were my life's greatest blessings. Sadly, little Junie was gone too soon, and my heart ripped that day. They say to love is to risk your heart, and a peace of mind went with him. I'm also a grandfather. Colby was the precious girl that kept me loving life. We'd sing together. I taught her all the great 50s and 60s music. She'd tag along to the golf course, and we'd lay in bed watching movies and eating bonbons. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. Adelie, even though we never met, your poppy loves you very much. And although I'm clearly too young, I'm a great-grandfather. Colby has blessed me with a great-granddaughter and my second namesake, Junie Rose. And let me just say, you plant a potato, you get a potato. I left this life sooner than I expected. I fought that monster cancer until my last breath. But hey, like the song says, I hope you dance, because I sure did.
So echoes of sweet love notes gently fall through forest stillness as the waiting Indian lover calls. When I am calling you, will you answer too? This song, Indian Love Call, was written by Robert Fermel as part of an operetta named Rosemary. I made it part of my one and only album, Sounds of Princess White Cloud, released in 1980. I loved playing this piece and may have included as part of my homage for my homeland. I'm Neoma White Cloud Brown, also known as Princess White Cloud, professionally. I was born on the Sioux Rosebud Reservation near the city of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, on May 18, 1902. My father was George White Cloud and was a full-blood member of the Oglala Sioux tribe and also a council chief and missionary. My mother, a professor at the University of Ohio, was of French and German descent. She was a singer and fostered my musical talent. I started my studies under her at the age of 11. I'm a graduate of the Peabody Conservatory of Music in Baltimore, Maryland, and where I studied piano and music and organ. And I furthered my studies at Darmstadt and Frankfurt conservatories and also at La Scala in Milan. When I returned to the United States, I studied at Juilliard in New York and conservatories at Chicago and New Jersey. My knowledge of languages was very intense, and I helped the U.S. intelligence during World War II. Now, not only did my music allow me to travel all over the world, but it also opened doors for me to perform from coast to coast in my homeland. My instrument of choice was the Hammond organ. Now, please don't think too poor of me after my own self-assessment, but I was a virtuoso. I was delighted to perform with Glenn Miller and his orchestra. I played for George Burns. I played on radio and television. And after becoming an MCA entertainer, that opened doors and venues for me to sing at hotels and concerts and nightclubs from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Now that's quite a journey and an accomplishment for a very young 16-year-old lady that started out playing organ in the church and also Wurlitzer at the Fox Theater in Atlanta, accompanying those silent films of the golden era. Now, after many years of travel, I married and settled down and found myself here in Biloxi. My first marriage was not the one I thought it was going to be, so it ended. But my second husband gave me roots. Kenneth Brown and I were married in 1958 and remained so until my death. I was a Biloxian for 33 years, and during that time I raised my nephew, Eddie White Eagle Hoff, as my own. Now, even with these roles as wife and mother, I still long to perform. Well, performing in music wasn't just what I did, it was who I was. And I performed at many coastal venues such as the Cocoa Cafe, the Broadwater Hotel for Dorothy Brown, the Sand Beach Steak Inn. And now the people here on the Gulf Coast probably best remember me in my role at Werline's in the Edgewater Mall. I performed there weekly at the grand piano or organ in full evening gown and tiara, of course. Now, not only did I do that for Werline's, but Werline's gave me a new career as a music teacher, introducing me to generations of Biloxi youngsters. Oh, I love to teach and hear and see the music through the ears and the eyes of my students. You know what? I bet some of you were my students, or at least your parents. I passed away on January the 5th, 1981, here in Biloxi, and was cremated. I am so delighted to be so fondly remembered by my Biloxi students.
Wasn't that a fascinating story? And a story it was. Princess Whitecloud was actually born Magdalena Hoff in 1902 in Shelby County, Ohio, to the Reverend and Mrs. William Hoff. She was actually married at least 4 times and had a daughter and a son. She seems to have created her Native American persona after becoming associated with a man by the name of Robert Redwing, who went by the name Chief Redwing. Well, there is no evidence that he was Native American, and the fact that she was no Native American either did not stop her from being known as Princess Whitecloud, not only in her professional life, but also in her private life. She was a trained opera singer. She was first violin in an orchestra and was a virtuoso on piano and organ. She is best described as a talented singer, musician of great intelligence, and a teacher with great style. She made her mark on the entertainment industry and on Biloxi.
Oh, give me land, lots of land under starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. I am Peter Joseph Lepre. People called me Fiddlin' Pete. I am from the north side of the Bay of Biloxi. It's where I was born and raised. It's where my love of music originated. It grew from the generations of musicians on both sides of my family tree. Why, it was as much a part of me as my right arm or my very heart and soul. So you've come to hear my tale? Well, I've been known to weave a magical story, so pull up a tree stump as I travel back a spell. Come with me, won't you? The year is 1899, yes, a century and a quarter ago. I was born at home. There weren't any hospitals back then, and it wasn't the custom. The village of Seymour, now known as the city of D'Iberville, had a midwife, Aunt Sissy Quave Young. Everybody called her Aunt Sissy, and it is a distinct possibility that she was called upon to assist my mother, Josephine Fountain Lepre. My father was Pierre Lepre, a native of the North Bay area himself. He was a fiddle player, as was his father before him. He gifted me my first fiddle and my first bicycle at age 7. Two great gifts that served me well and brought me much joy throughout my lifetime. I was baptized in the Mission of Sacred Heart and was a lifelong member. The little wooden church was only 15 years old when I was born. At Seymour School, I was educated by Miss Lorena Bessie Mangan. What a wonderful teacher she was. Back then, it wasn't uncommon to see people traveling by horse and buggy. Father grew our food and traded for what we needed. Yes, young ones, I remember a different way of life, and it was hunky-dory. It seemed I had an ear for music and showed great promise with the instrument, and I guess practice made perfect, as I couldn't seem to put it down. My mother's people, the Fountains, were brimming with musical talent. Why, there were too many to name on that side of the family who sang, danced, formed bands, and played instruments of all kinds. One particular musician on that side was my dear cousin Pete Fountain. A world-renowned clarinetist, Pete found great fame on the Lawrence Welk Show and owned his own clubs in New Orleans and other coastal cities like Biloxi. I'll never forget his performance at the Mass for Pope John Paul II in New Orleans in 1987 when the Pope visited America. Yes, friends, I was there at that historic event. Now, music wasn't my livelihood. I was a landowner and a landlord. However, music is what filled my life with joy. I played music from one side of the coast to the other and from north to south. I played weddings, parties, dances, outdoor events, just about any type of social gathering you can imagine. My favorite musicians to play with were Robbie Tibolet and Jack Bottier. We played together many times. I had two methods of transportation to get me to my music jobs: my bicycle or the feet the good Lord gave me. It wasn't uncommon to see me strolling along the old wooden Back Bay Bridge heading south to Biloxi proper on 2 wheels or else in full stride. It's an old joke now, but it went something like this. Fiddlin' Pete was walking along the bridge when a friend slowed down and said, "Hey Pete, hop in. I'll take you where you need to go." Pete just smiled and said, "No thank you. I'm in a hurry." I didn't mind the walking or the biking, and I know it's why I lived to see 91 years. Why, there is no telling how many miles I walked or how many hours I played the fiddle. I love to travel the world, and I always brought my fiddle along with me. I visited Nova Scotia and Canada with my dear nephew, Brother Jerome Lepre, a brother of the Holy Cross and an educator of young minds. Junior was also quite the genealogist and wrote several volumes on Gulf Coast families. I also took a 3-week, 5,000-mile tour of several countries in South America. My son, Peter Irvin, took that trip with me. He was a fantastic musician, played the upright bass. I traveled the great United States extensively and made several trips to Washington, D.C. In fact, I witnessed the inauguration of several U.S. presidents, including President John F. Kennedy in 1961. I was blessed with 2 children, Peter Irvin Lepre and Helen Marie Lepre Wiltz. The good Lord also blessed me with grandchildren to tell all my tales. I played my fiddle for them and taught them all my favorite song, "You Are My Sunshine." That's what Thomas, Emily, and Anna were to me, pure sunshine. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for spending time with me today, and remember, live every moment to the fullest. Each day is a gift from our Creator. I left this world in 1990. Remember me as you pass by. As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you will be. Prepare for death and follow me. Thank you.
With my eyes wide open, I'm dreaming. Do I deserve such a break? pinch me to prove I'm awake. I can't believe that you're really mine. Oh, hello. It's just perfectly wonderful to be here in my summer home of Biloxi. I have so many beautiful memories here. All of my growing up summers were spent here, playing by the shore, floating in the Mexican Sea, fishing and picnicking on Deer Island, and of course, indulging in delicious seafood. The fried fish and shrimp, well, it was not easy on the figure. I was born and raised in Hattiesburg on very old family land that belonged to my father's people, the Goffs. Did you know they can trace their lineage all the way back to the Mayflower? My mother's family were the Davises, the Jefferson Davis line to be exact. I'm Dorothy Del Gooch, daughter of Elbert Lee Goff and Lillian Davis Goff. I was born January 30th, 1915. When I was just 1 year old, I was selected as the most beautiful baby of Hattiesburg. My younger sister Helen was just 2 years behind me. Now, I bet you're all wondering why I'm here on the grave of John Kennedy, Biloxi's 17th mayor. Well, I'm getting to that. You see, in 1925, my family moved from our home in Hattiesburg to New Orleans. Mother wanted the best education for my sister and me, so she and father enrolled us in the Sophie B. Wright Day School for Girls. We were not only schooled in the 3 R's, but also in music, dance, theater, classic literature, and diction, which was very important for a girl from the Deep South if she wanted to act or sing on stages around the country. Of course, we continued visiting the Mississippi coast each summer. And there's one particular summer that is etched upon my heart. I took part in the Miss Biloxi Bathing Beauty Pageant of 1929 and won. I was crowned by Mayor Kennedy. I soon became Miss America and finally Miss Universe 1930, crowned in Galveston, Texas. Now, it was brought to my attention that beauty queens rarely parlay their victories into acting careers. Nevertheless, how could having your picture in every newspaper across the country be a bad thing? Besides the $3,000 I won between 1929 and 30, those photographs got me into vaudeville. And my mother, always by my side, accompanied me from town to town. And my voice was always a strength, and it caught the attention of someone very influential, Florence Ziegfeld. Mother and I changed plans, and off to New York we flew. I would be a Ziegfeld Follies girl during what would become Mr. Ziegfeld's final review. Now, I knew I'd broken some barrier, and doors were opening rapidly. It was Mr. Ziegfeld who dropped my last name and created my stage name, Dorothy Del. And Ziegfeld opened many doors. I was offered the supporting role in the motion picture Wharf Angel. This role included a full song. My performance earned rave reviews, and critics predicted I'd become a star. We moved to Beverly Hills. In my next role, I co-starred with Shirley Temple in Little Miss Marker. Shirley and I sang and danced together, and yes, she was every bit as adorable in person as she was on screen. I loved her, and she loved me. Then I co-starred with Jack Oakey in Shoot the Works. This role included the beautiful song With My Eyes Wide Open. Can you believe all of this took place in 4 short years? Well, neither could I. My head was spinning and my dreams were coming true. Life was so very full. I was offered the starring role in Now and Forever, and I signed a long-term contract with Paramount Studios. This role would forever cement my career as an actress. At least, that's what everyone thought. On the evening of June 8th, 1934, I attended a lavish party with my dear friend Dr. Carl Wagner. We enjoyed ourselves so much that we've lost track of time. At 2 a.m., we left the party, and Carl was speeding to get me home. And his car left the roadway. In a horrific crash, both our lives came to an abrupt end. I was 19 years old. Please don't be sad when you think of me or see my movies. I'm the girl whose dreams came true. Some people live 80 years and can't make the same statement.
Music has always been important to Biloxi. We are a joyous, celebratory people. The natives of this area were musical, perhaps keeping beat with the rhythm of the Gulf itself. The first people who settled here brought their people's music with them. The French, the Irish, the Spanish, and later, my people, the Yugoslavs. I am Mary Rosetti Pitalo, but family and friends call me Marica. I am a native of Hvar, Croatia, a part of what was once known as the country of Yugoslavia. I came to this country when I was 9 years old on April 20th, 1904. My mother, Antonia, and my 2 younger siblings, Vincent and Anna, and I, all sailed aboard the ship Slavonia into the great harbor of New York, New York. I will never forget that day. My father sent for us once he got settled down here. He was Tony Rosetti, a fisherman, a boat owner, and one of a handful of immigrants who founded the Biloxi Slavonian Lodge, an iconic cultural center in the city to this very day. I married Tony Pitalo, and together we parented 3 children, Mandina, Stephen, and little Tony. First-generation Americans and Biloxians through and through. Well, my life was spent as a wife and mother, raising my children, cooking, cleaning, and volunteering at the Slavonian Lodge. Truly, I was a fixture in that place on Myrtle Street, of which we were all so proud. In the 1950s, along with all of the other celebrations and cultural events, we held weekly dances and concerts for young people. Yanki Barhanovich scouted out local and regional talent and brought them to Point Cadet to perform at the lodge. You see, Yankee was a leader amongst our people, and ultimately an influential leader in Biloxi itself. It was one day in 1956 when Yankee brought in a young man who would become famous the world over. You might have heard of him. His name was Elvis Presley. Well, this young man had performed on the same Louisiana stage as Martha Ann, Yankee's daughter, who was a talented singer in her own right. Actually, Martha was a bigger name than Elvis at those times. And when Yankee was offered a job as Elvis's manager, he regrettably had to turn it down because he was very busy with his cultural activities and with managing his daughter's career. I was there volunteering at the lodge the day that Elvis walked through those doors. To me, he was a shy, skinny young man without much personality. That is until he got on stage, and then he became an entirely different being. Born to move, with a God-given voice and the face of an angel, he entranced and beguiled his audiences. It was that first performance that birthed Biloxi's love affair with Elvis and his love affair with Biloxi. He came back many times after that first visit, and there would be Elvis sightings all over town. He was taken with a local Biloxi teenager named June. It is actually because of June that I am standing here today at the grave of Carol Marie Manuel. Little Carol has a beautiful connection with Elvis. You see, she was ill with leukemia in 1956, and her mother knew June's mother. Well, looking to make all of Carol's dreams come true, Mrs. Manuel called her friend and told her of Carol's love of Elvis and his songs on the radio. Immediately when asked, Elvis said yes to a visit with the little girl. He sang to this precious girl and even brought her a gift. He brought her an album that was personally signed by him for her. A couple of months later, he visited Carol in the hospital and held her hand while she received a blood transfusion. Well, she opened her eyes and she looked at Elvis and said, "I knew you'd come back to see me. It wasn't long after that Carol was gone from this world, but never from the hearts and minds of those who loved her. She was only 8 years old. And Elvis? Well, you all know his story. It's one the world will never forget. Elvis was slated to open the Mississippi Coast Coliseum in 1977. He was booked for that job by the very first commissioner of the Coliseum, none other than Yankee Barhanovich. Well, it would have been a triumphant return to Biloxi, but it was not meant to be, as Elvis died 2 months before the Coliseum opened, at the young age of 42 years old. Biloxi wept, but his music and the time he spent here continues to delight Biloxians to this very day. Oh, and by the way, Elvis fans from across the world come to Biloxi to put little pennies on Carol's grave, bonded by their love for the young man from Tupelo, Mississippi, who was and remains the king of rock and roll. Thank you.
So echoes of sweet love notes gently fall through the forest stillness as the waiting Indian's lover call. When I'm calling you, will you answer too? This song, Indian Love Call, was composed by Rudolph Frimmel as a part of an operetta entitled Rosemarie. I made it a part of my one and only album, The Sounds of Princess Whitecloud, that I released in 1980. I love to play this piece, and I may have included it as a homage to my heritage. I am Neoma Whitecloud Brown, also known as Princess Whitecloud professionally. I was born on the Sioux Rosebud Reservation near the city of Sioux Falls in South Dakota on May 18, 1902. My father was George Whitecloud, a full-blood member of the Oglala Sioux tribe. He was a council chief and a missionary. My mother, a professor at the University of Ohio, was of French and German descent, and she was a singer. And she fostered my musical talent when I started studying under her at the age of 11. I was a graduate of the Peabody Conservatory of Music in Baltimore, Maryland, where I studied piano and organ. I furthered my studies at Darmstadt and Frankfurt Conservatoriums at La Scala in Milan. Returning to the United States, I studied at Juilliard in New York and conservatories in Chicago and New Jersey. My knowledge of languages was vast, and I assisted intelligence for the U.S. during World War II. Not only did music allow me to study abroad, but it also opened the door for me to perform from coast to coast in my homeland. My instrument of choice was the Hammond organ. I hope you don't think poorly of me for my self-assessment, but I was a virtuoso. I had the delight of playing with the Glenn Miller and his orchestra. I played for George Burns. I played on radio and television. And becoming an MCA, Music Corporation of America entertainer, gave me the access to perform at concerts, hotels, and supper clubs from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Quite an accomplishment and a journey for a young lady, the age of 16, who started playing the organ at the church and then at the Wurlitzer at the Fox Theater in Atlanta, accompanying those silent films of the golden era. After years of travel, I married and settled down, and I found myself in Biloxi. My first marriage was not the one I thought it would be, so it ended, but my second husband gave me roots. Kenneth Brown and I married in 1958 and remained so until my death. I was a Biloxian for 33 years. During that time, I raised my own nephew, Eddie White Eagle Hoff, and I raised him as my own. Even with my new roles as wife and mother, I longed to perform. Performing in music wasn't just what I did, it was who I was. I performed at many coast venues, including the Coco Cafe, the Broadwater Hotel for Dorothy Brown, the Sand Beach Steak Inn. But perhaps most people in the Gulf Coast region will remember me for my role at Werlein's Music in Edgewater Mall. I performed weekly in the mall on grand piano or organ, in full evening gown and tiara, of course. And my relationship with Werlein's began my next career as a music teacher. And that is when I began to meet generations of Biloxi youngsters. I absolutely loved teaching and hearing and seeing the music through their eyes and ears. Why, I bet some of you were my students, or maybe your parents. I passed on January 5th, 1981 at the age of 78 here in Biloxi. I was cremated. I'm thrilled to be fondly remembered by my Biloxi students.
Thank y'all, thank y'all. One of the coast's finest musicians. There's nothing they could have said to make me prouder. I don't know what it is about that Mississippi soil or that water from the Gulf of Mexico that's brewed up such great performers. Man, it sure has since the very beginning. Clarence Harter here, also known as Kenny Harter, also known as the One Cat Combo. Had a lot of different names. I've loved music my entire life. I was born in New Orleans in 1916. By the time I was 3 years old, we were living right here in Biloxi. Now, I served in the Navy in World War II, and I played first chair saxophone while stationed in Australia. Later, after I returned home, I toured around with Eddie Caron's big band for a while. Not long after that, I formed my own combo group. Now, like any group getting started here on the Gulf Coast, we played all those big locations. I know y'all know the ones I'm talking about. I'm talking about AMVETS, American Legion, the VFW. Yeah, we did dance halls and nightclubs and that kind of thing too. You know, history might remember me for being a multi-talented musician, and that is very true. Among the various instruments I played, I particularly enjoyed the clarinet and the trumpet. But hey, if y'all were to ask anybody around here, man, they just tell you I was a colorful character. They remember me for cutting up and telling jokes, sometimes even when I wasn't on stage. You know, maybe it's that part of my personality that led me to form my one-man band, which is exactly what it sounds like. It was me, playing piano, percussion, brass, and if y'all can believe this, even singing a little bit like Louis Armstrong. It got me a little bit of recognition, got me on the Lawrence Welk show a couple of times, got to play with the likes of Pete Fountain and Al Hurt. You know, there was another band from this area that was a big inspiration to me. I want to keep their memory alive too. It was the Fred Harris Jazz Band. They consisted of Peter Inglado on guitar, Joe Ibley on horns, Thomas Bloom on bass, and of course, Fred himself playing trombone. Now, they played throughout the 20s and 30s. A lot of the music that I created was inspired by the sound that they had. And for the last 12 years of my career, I toured around the Atlantic coast, and I came to play at the Sugar Mill Restaurant Lounge. And then, March 11th, 1999, my long, colorful career finally came to an end. I left behind the love of my life, Zoe, our son, Ken, his wife, Patricia, and of course, my beloved granddaughter, Paige. Now, I would want history to remember me for how much I loved my family and how long and vibrant my career was. But man, if you can remember me for anything, remember me for how much fun we all had together. I can sit here and talk about inspiration all night, but for me, the biggest inspiration of all was having a good time and making sure everybody around me was having fun too. Now, to this day, the coast is still full of great talent. Local artists are everywhere, maybe even among us right now. Let me tell you something. Next time you're out at the club, watching a show, or maybe you're out there performing yourself, I want you to remember the One Cat Combo. He'd want you to have fun with it. I mean, after all, I am one of the coast's finest musicians. Thank y'all.
Blue sky shining on me, nothing but blue skies do I see. Bluebird singing a song nothing but bluebirds all day long. Never saw the sun shining so bright, never saw things going so right. Wondering about the days hurrying by, when you're in love, gee, how they fly. Blue days, all of them gone, nothing but blue skies from now on. Growing up in my little Bayard Street neighborhood, the old ladies would sit on their porches and have these funny little sayings, and some of them were nuggets of wisdom. One I remember fondly is, "Unto every life some rain must fall." And isn't that the truth? We all have our dark days, myself included. But singing brought the sunshine and brought love and life to me and our audiences. And that's the power of music. It lifts, transports, inspires, and it can even heal. I'm Gloria Kettepton. I was born here and lived in Biloxi my whole life. I graduated from Biloxi High School, class of 1943. This is the grave of my parents, Stella and Eddie Kennett. I'm actually buried over in Biloxi National Cemetery with my husband and bandmate, Doug Penferton. And yes, you heard me correctly, I said bandmate. Doug and I were members of a little musical group called Gloria and the Playmates. Other members of our group included Leo Renault, Pat King, Teddy Campbell, Carol Cunningham, and the legend himself, Marion Prof Carpenter. Now there was a man who loved music, but you will get to hear all about him later. Now, we all played at the Broadwater Hotel for the better part of 30 years and up and down the Mississippi Gulf Coast. My husband Doug was actually a native of Long Island, New York. He came down to Biloxi and was stationed at Keesler Field with the Air Force. He was part of the Air Force Band. He came down in 1941, and by 1943, we were married. We were blessed with 63 years of marriage and 4 beautiful children. Our eldest, Wayne, used to play stand-up bass with us in the band, and we had 3 beautiful daughters, Belinda, Penny, and Deidre. Unfortunately, our beautiful lives together were struck by tragedy. In 1972, we lost our daughter, Belinda, and her husband, Robert Bogart, in a plane accident. She was only 21 at the time. He was 25. And they had just started their married life together when their plane crashed down above Vandalia, Illinois. And not even a decade later, in 1980, we lost our only son, Wayne. Now, Wayne was an experienced ship captain on the oil field boat, the Sally P. But one dark November night, their ship was rammed by a Liberian tanker, and most of the crew and its captain were lost. Our Wayne was only 35 at the time. Unto every life, some rain must fall. Well, this was a little more than rain. This was a hurricane. For years afterward, people would ask me, how do you do it? How do you get through something like that? And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. No one knows how they get through it. You just do. You have to. For my husband Doug and I, we leaned heavily into our faith. We were members of Our Lady of Fatima Catholic Church since its foundation in 1951. And after 35 years of playing up and down the Gulf Coast and entertaining lots of locals and possibly even more tourists, Doug and I finally retired. I lost him in 2006, and I joined him, Belinda, and Wayne in 2012. And we've been singing ever since. And now I'd like to introduce you all to my dear friend, a man who had a kind word for every student, friend, and complete stranger he ever came into contact with, Marion Prof Carpenter. I'm on top of the world looking down on creation, and the only explanation I can find is the love we all found ever since you've been around. Your love's put us at the top of the world.
All right, everybody. Corny joke alert. I would apologize, but you know exactly what you signed up for today. I got 3 jokes for you. First, how do you make a trombone sound like a French horn? Simple. You stick your fist in the bell and you miss half the notes. Oh, I thought that joke was pretty sharp, but I guess it fell a little flat. That was a second joke, by the way. All right, I got one more, and then your torture will be complete for the evening. What is the difference between a trumpet player and a government bond? A government bond eventually matures and earns money. All right, I'll stop. I surrender. There's only one thing that I loved more than corny jokes, and that was music. I love music. Let me say that one more time because it bears repeating. I love music. There's nothing else in the world like it. Can you think of anything else that can make you laugh, make you smile, make you cry? Is there anything else in the universe that can raise your spirits, raise your hopes, or raise goosebumps like music? A drum line can make your heart beat just as fast as those sticks will go. A violin can heal a wounded spirit and help you slip off to a sweet, sacred slumber. Magical, mystical music. You can't touch it, but it sure touches you. In 1943, a very young Mr. and Mrs. Marion Prof. Carpenter moved to Biloxi, Mississippi from Statesboro, Georgia, my birthplace. I was a graduate of Georgia State University, and that fine institution not only gave me an education on music, but it also provided me with the love of my life, my college sweetheart, Winona Aldred. Was it my incredible trumpet playing or my virtuosic songwriting ability that won the young girl's heart? I may never know. All I do know is that I sure am glad that that young woman saw something in that young man who had music in his head and music in his heart. Well, in '43, I got a job with the Biloxi school system. And me and Winona, we packed up everything we owned and stuck it in the back of our car, and we drove all the way to Biloxi. That very night, they gave me the keys to the Biloxi High School Band Hall, and that night, that's where we slept, on the floor of the band hall, and let that set the tone. About a decade later, one of my students nicknamed me Bear, and from then on out, my band hall was known as the Bear's Den. Now, for all of you non-band people out there today, first of all, congratulations, you dodged a bullet. But secondly, you need to know that so much more than just music happens in a band hall. Life happens in a band hall. Every now and then, the students will pop in some days, all copacetic, you know. And then there'll be some days where they'll come in and there'll be tears or fear or anger in those young students' eyes. And that's when you realize you've been given two incredible gifts, and that is your ears. Friends, sometimes all you have to do is open your doors, open your arms, open your heart, and listen. I came to find out very quickly that I could have a profound impact on every single student that I came across, and that is a responsibility that I never took lightly. It was an honor and a privilege, because friends, this right here was so much more than just a job. I want to instill in every single student that with a lot of hard work and a good attitude, you could accomplish anything you put your mind out to. Now, how many bands did I lead in my time? That's a good question. Quite a few. I had two separate stints at Biloxi High School. The first one was from 1943 to 47, and the second one was from 1961 all the way to my retirement in 1978. But in between, I taught at quite a few other schools around the Gulf Coast, including Notre Dame, Sacred Heart, D'Iberville, Nichols, and St. Martin. The Biloxi High School Indian Band uniform, that was instituted underneath my tenure. So was the kilt uniform for Sacred Heart. Both award-winning music programs, I might add.
Not that you're bragging.
Oh no, I would never brag. I'm far too humble of a man to do that. That arrow that was shot into the night sky, the flaming arrow, at the beginning of every single Biloxi High School football game, that was also my invention. I was nothing if not a showman. Now, how many students did I teach during my tenure? Well, thousands. Literally thousands of students. Now, you know how many bands I led and how many students I taught, but I was also a musician at heart, and I was part of quite a few bands as well. How many, you may ask? That's tough to say, but my best estimate was around 40. Now, you might be thinking, Prof, did you write music for every band you were part of? The answer is yes. I wrote a lot of music, many songs. I even wrote a couple good ones. A few of my favorites were entitled World of Make-Believe and All My Dreams Are of You, which were performed by Bill Anderson. Pee Wee Maddox, a buddy of mine, we both started a publishing company together, and together we wrote the song Searching, which was performed by Kitty Wells of Grand Ole Opry fame. I'll tell you, friends, I sure was proud to be the leader of what was known as the pride of the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and we had a lot to be proud of. We performed in numerous presidential appearances and presidential inaugurations. We marched in I don't even know how many bowl games, including the Gator Bowl, the Senior Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, the Orange Bowl, and the Cotton Bowl parades. And speaking of parades, Mardi Gras was my favorite time of the year. As long as I was the band director, the Biloxi High School Band marched in every Mississippi Gulf Coast Carnival parade while I had my tenure. And I'll tell you, I even took those kids all the way up to Carnegie Hall in New York to perform. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Prof, how many students did you have to sell stuff for to get all of those students up to New York City? The answer is a lot. All I can say is thank God for band parents and thank God for band fundraisers, which we all know is essentially the same thing. But probably my favorite memories of my time as a teacher were the pep rallies. All I would have to do is step up to that microphone and let out my big signature bear roar. And those students would start clapping their hands and shouting at the top of their lungs and stamping their feet that I thought that gym was going to crumble to the ground. Oh, friends, I accomplished so much during my decades-long career that I could bore you from dusk till dawn with everything in my life, but I believe in keeping my time here brief. All I will say is that there is one achievement that I had that towers above all the rest, the most important thing I ever did in my life, and that was raising my 4 beautiful children. I had 3 daughters, Nona, Kathy, and Sherry, and I had 1 son, Marion Jr. In fact, my daughter Kathy today was so gracious as to donate my old whistle, my old baton, and my old trumpet for this presentation today. Well, as any musician and any band director knows, no matter how good a performance you may have, sooner or later, you have to wrap it up. And such was the case for me. I left everything behind and went to that great big band hall in the sky back in 1982. I was only 65 years old. But don't feel too bad for me. I managed to fit in a lot of music and a lot of love into those short 65 years. 4 years before my death, when I retired back in 1978, on April 11th, I wrote my farewell address to my last class of students. I printed out a copy and gave one to each of them. And I must say, I am humbled that all these decades later, so many of my old students kept that very same copy. And today I shall conclude this presentation with the conclusion of that very address. And it goes like this. You are in my heart. I'll love you forever. Work hard, brave heart, for the sake of the feather.
Cherry. Oh, wait a minute, guys.
Please, we got to rehearse. Yeah. Y'all are like herding cats.
Ray, man, why are we still rehearsing? We've been a band for 64 years. A few years here on Earth, and who knows how long in eternity. Man, we're as good as we're ever going to get.
He knew that's a certainty. We're not going to be any better than we are right now.
I heard that.
Go ahead, make fun of me, but I still remember the words that Prof told me. He said, make it your own. The music belongs to you. Give it your all. It's in you. So humor me if I want us to rehearse to be the best we can be. You do remember that I was the Notre Dame High School drum major, 1959, 1960, under the direction of the great Marion Prof. Carpenter.
Remember, how could we forget? You remind us ad nauseum.
It made me nauseous.
A 1, 2, 3, 4. Cherry,
Cherry,
cherry, cherry pie.
Oh,
Cherry, cherry pie. Cherry, cherry pie. Oh, so good. Oh, that was very good, very good.
Good? Ray, that was damn good. You two do know that the Rockin' Rebels made Cherry Pie the national anthem of Biloxi.
You know, it's about time Biloxi became its own sovereign nation. I mean, after all, we've always danced to the beat of a different drummer, and usually that drummer was Dorothy Fournier.
Where in heaven is Dennis and Joe Landry? And Pat Thornton, he was just here. Those guys are never late for rehearsal.
Ray, here's a better question. Why are we here at the Biloxi Cemetery at our grave sites? And who are all these wonderful people out here?
Lord, our mamas taught us better than this. My name is Raymond Joseph Fournier. Most people called me Ray or Rockin' Ray. And me and these nuts, these fine musicians, were members of a local Biloxi band called the Rockin' Rebels. We hit Biloxi like a hurricane in 1957 with our Biloxi flavor of New Orleans jazz and rhythm and blues. And may I introduce to you these fine gentlemen. This is Walter Jerome Blessy and Salvador Pinu Toronto. And Pinu, we are here today to, first of all, we're here today because Walter is buried in the VA, and I am about a stone's throw right back over here. And we're here to tell all these beautiful people who the Rockin' Rebels were and what they meant to the city of Biloxi.
Judging by a lot of the gray hair I see out here, I think some people might remember it. But for all of you who are too young to remember, we were a bunch of Biloxi youngsters who loved music and wanted to make some money too. If my brother Gerald were here, he'd tell you how Father O'Hanlon of St. Michael's Catholic Church, along with Pancho Kovacevic and Lloyd Vaught of the Point Cadet Boys Club, asked him to form a band to play for the younger kids at the St. Michael Gym on Sunday afternoons. Well, we formed up and took the gig. Then in 1957, Johnny Elmer and the Rockets could no longer commit to the Slavonian Lodge on Saturday nights. So they hired us to play for Saturday nights for the next 3 years. And voila, just like that, 2 gigs a week.
Hey guys, before we go down memory lane any further, why don't we tell all the good folks out here who was actually in the Rockin' Rebels band?
Great idea, Pinu. The brothers Gerald and Walter Blessy, their cousin Earl Bunn Blessy, my brother Dodie Fournier, Barry Ferranda, Pat Thornton, Pinu Toronto, Joe Landry, and me on lead vocals. A little while later, Joe's brother Dennis joined our group, and in around 1957 or so, Charlie Elliott would sit in with us every once in a while. Both Pinu and Earl Bunn also sat in with other coast bands. 3 sets of brothers in our group, and Pinu was Dodie and I's first cousin. We were as Biloxi as you could get. We were either students of Notre Dame High School or Biloxi High School. And our families were musical as well. The Blessy's dad had an orchestra in the 30s playing swing and Dixieland jazz music. And their cousin Bunn's dad was also a professional jazz trumpeter. The Blessys were very influential with our music. They were born in New Orleans, but at a very young age came to Biloxi, and with their experience, they helped us develop our sound.
Yes, they did. All of our parents were very supportive too. Even though across the United States, a lot of parents were against rock and roll. Ray, your parents let us practice at your house over on Magnolia Street. Mr. Landry and Mr. Fournier and my dad would take us to out-of-town gigs. We also had a lot of support from the community because they knew we were giving their kids some place to go where they were safe, they could dance and listen to music and stay out of trouble. Well, mostly.
Man, those days were great. They were just about near perfect. But there was other places that we played that we need to tell them about other than St. Michael's Gym and the Savonian Lodge.
We played at the French Club and the Italian American Society, and we played at the old Biloxi Community Center, which is on the north side of Highway 90, right where Santa Maria Retirement Home was. I think y'all call it Hotel Legends today.
We played at the St. Martin Community Center and the d'Iberville Community Center.
We played at the Buena Vista in their Hurricane Room for many carnival balls and Mardi Gras balls. We played on outdoor stages, very much like this one here, for bazaars at St. Michael's Parish and Sacred Heart Parish and St. John's Parish. We tried to play some swing and some Dixieland music for some of the older people there, but our audiences love to dance the jitterbug and the Biloxi Shuffle to our music.
Man, that was some great places that we played at, but the ones that was the most fun for me, and I'm sure y'all will agree, was on those floats during the Mardi Gras parade and on those boats during the Blessing of the Fleet. Don't get no more Biloxi than that.
That's for sure.
Oh, we played weddings and parties. We played at the Keesler Airmen's Club and the NCO Club until they decided we were too young. Something about child labor laws.
We crossed the border and went into Gulfport and played for the Gulfport Yacht Club, and also went to Pascagoula and played at the community center there. We headed up to Oxford and played at the Catholic Student Association at Ole Miss, and also for fraternity parties there. We then also played at Perk and for parties there. We had more gigs than we could ever play for.
The Rockin' Rebels never broke up. We grew up. The time came for us to destine who we were supposed to be. Some of us went to college. Some of us went to war. All of us went to work. We got married. We had children, and we succeeded. I'm sorry. We succeeded. But no matter what life threw at us, we were always rebels to the end.
Right.
Some of us, we even mentioned in our obituaries that we were rockin' rebels.
That's right. We, Walter, you went on to Ole Miss as on a track scholarship from Biloxi High. You earned your BS degree in accounting and then your Juris Doctorate. You then joined the U.S. Army and served in West Germany, and also received medals of commendation for your service, meritorious service, in South Vietnam. Thank you for your service.
Thank
you. You went on your professional career. You were an accountant. You were a venture capital investor. You were a CFO of an insurance company. But what you really got to do and thoroughly enjoyed was when you became that great gourmet chef, when you and your dear Catherine opened that beautiful home on the beach called Chateau Blessed Bed and Breakfast.
Thank you for that, dear friend. Oh, and our boy Pinu here had quite a full life, too. His zest for life was felt by all of those who knew and loved him. He was not only a member of the Rockin' Rebels, but he was also a member of Johnny Elmer and the Rockets and the Biloxi Blues Band. He has the distinction of being the first king of the Italian American Society. He also founded the Biloxi Boxing Club and made sure that every one of those kids had all the equipment he needed without any cost whatsoever. He was the deputy commissioner of the Mississippi Athletics Commission. He was employed by Toronto Amusement for 55 years. But with all those accomplishments, we would be remiss if we didn't mention his two great loves, his beautiful family and his love of music. Pinu had the gift of people. He loved them, and they loved him right back. And you, Rockin' Ray, of all the Rockin' Rebels, you made the big time. Biloxi's favorite musician. I mean, you made music your life's choice. Musician, vocalist, singer-songwriter, and you worked alongside your father in the family processing business, R. Fournier and Sons Seafood. But after playing the coast for quite a long time, you decided to make music your career. And you had 6 adoring daughters who to this day still talk about how you used to sing My Girl to each
My
one of
girl,
them.
my girl.
And you both wrote the most heartfelt anthem for your native city. It still brings a tear to the eye of all those who love Biloxi.
I know a place where we can go. It's on the Gulf of Mexico, down in Biloxi. Every night they're having a party down on the Gulf Coast, down in Biloxi. Squeeze you later.